Hey, so welcome back. Now we have the pleasure to welcome Fanny, who is director at the London office of Brunswick Group. Fanny advises both cultural institutions and corporate companies on reputation, critical issues, and corporate social responsibility. So Fanny is going to take us through why and how cultural institutions can operate a shift from a primarily cultural to a cultural and societal mission. In other words, from input-led to impact-led, and to what extent a raison d'être is crucial in that context. So, Fanny, up to you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon all. As Annabelle said, I work with cultural institutions and businesses around the world, and I've done so for many years, from the British Museum to the V&A, Louvre Abu Dhabi and Paris Photo, for example. Today, I'll take you through a process that I've done many times with clients to help them define their purpose and to put it in action as well later down the line. So we'll be looking at three things, really. What purpose is and why it really matters. What being impact-led and demonstrate social value as an institution is. And finally, what leading with purpose means in practice with a short case study. So why is purpose and why should we care really as cultural institutions? Well, purpose is really why you exist in the world and the role that you really want to play in society. So it's really your commitment to deliver social value on top of the cultural or the financial value that you deliver already through your institution or your business. I'll start with a little bit of context. From inequality to climate change, the world is facing major issues that are just front of mind for society, and they're really here to stay. Climate change, diversity and inclusion agenda, they're just all on top of the pile at the moment. And if you find one institution who's not actually worried about it, I'd love to hear about it after this. This means that non-profits and cultural institutions are actually asked to lead with purpose to address some of those greatest challenges. And if you look at the press, they're actually being asked to act right now, not tomorrow. And that's also because with the pandemic, we've really seen those inequalities and the issues being exacerbated massively. Increasingly, and quite simply, it means delivering social value. In 2019, ICOM started a review of the definition of a museum, and last year they came up with one definition that hasn't been approved. I think we'll know about that in a few months' time. But it said that the museum could be an inclusive and democratizing institution that contributed to global equality and social justice. Now, those aren't really empty words. Institutions are already trying to deliver social justice. The Wellcome Collection has a brilliant curriculum if you wanted to look out. But also, it's important to remind ourselves it's not just about the cultural sector, it's about society as a whole. Businesses are also making that really high on their agenda through the ESG agenda, which is the environmental, social, and governance matters for corporate governance effectively. Now, purpose is not about just words. It should drive everything you do or don't by giving a framework for you to make decisions in the institution. Maria Bolsho, who's the director of the Tate Galleries in the UK, said that how you drive your message outwards really matter, but it's not enough. And that means with purpose, you really need to shift all your actions and decisions throughout the whole organization, not to talk the talk, but to actually walk the walk. And that's also to avoid the pitfall of purpose washing, which is really just empty words without action driving impact. Done well, I believe, and I've seen it, it really drives social impact and it helps other people get there. The social practice artist Susan Lacey talked about in the New York Times caring institutions more and more driving social change as a trend that she's seen and experienced. And also the American Alliance of Museums asked in a survey if citizens were fine being recommended behaviors and actions by institutions, and they are, but only if it's aligned with their purpose, because it means it's authentic and genuine. Now, focusing on the institution, how do we get there? You have a picture of the Couch in the Freud Museum in London here, because the methodology that I've been using for years, I call the psychoanalysis of the organization, looking at both the external and internal factors that shape who we are and why we do what we do. This means starting with shifting your mindset. By this I mean most institutions talk about themselves, about their inputs and outputs, and that's very much who you are, what you do, why it matters for the institution, and really case studies of your activity and programs. I'd like to shift your thinking to why we do it, why it matters for the world around us, thinking about all these issues that we just talked about, and how we really drive social value alongside the cultural or the financial value you're already delivering. I always start with the proposition itself. What is it that we want to change in the world? And I look at two different steps. The first one is the external environment you operate in. No one exists in a vacuum, and so you really need to make sure that your proposition actually resonates with the world around you, because it needs to speak to the audiences and stakeholders you're actually working with, and your communities around you as well. And to really understand and get to the bottom of it, I'd basically look at your peers, and I also look at media conversations on the topics you want to speak to, what the industry trends are, any new developments in the sector, just to really map what we're playing with and in which context. The second part is more the introspective analysis of the organization, and that's very much where are we now, really? And to do that, personally, I speak to your leaders and your partners, people in the boardrooms who might have an interesting perspective. I look at your strategy and your reports, and increasingly as well the data that we have at our fingertips, and that's really helpful to analyze to really get a bigger picture of where we are. Once we've done that research, we get insights and themes that really form the skeleton of what your purpose proposition should be. And the reason I do all that research is really to make sure that the story you're going to tell is genuine and credible, because it's rooted in your track record and your future ambitions. It's not just out of thin air. Now, if it was just only words, it would be vacuous. And so the next step is to really embed it across the organization. We're talking about programs and policies. We're talking people, content, networks, programs, everything that you can think about throughout the institution. It's not going to change in a day. I work with clients over multi-year programs to get there. But throughout the journey, it's really important to monitor and evaluate progress. Sometimes you're going to fail, and that's okay. We should recognize it as well. To adapt what we do to make it work better, and to innovate when you find fertile ground for growth or simply for experimentation for the institution. Now, that's the theory. And I wanted to give you a case study to really put it in, bring it to life. I can't really use a client case study because most of the work I do is confidential. So I've come up with an invented museum that you should really expect to find in Paris, but sadly doesn't exist, only in my imagination for now. And that's the Museum of Love at First Sight. Now, when I started working with the museum, their mission and vision was so focused on who they are, the ultimate collection of people falling and being in love in Paris and around the world, and how they do it. They put on exhibitions and events to share stories of love between people across centuries and continents, but really focusing on that very first magic spark that starts it all. If that sounds trivial to you, it did to me at first. But then, our research shows that love is a really serious matter. And we might have positioning issues with the organization. Firstly, love is a matter of survival. Love deprivation in old age or from birth can really impact and affect your life quality and life potential. Secondly, not everyone falls or is in love. Are we excluding communities of people who never find romantic love, or simply ignoring trends like incels or femcels that actually are really interesting to look at in society, potentially for the program? And thirdly, we might have an existential crisis altogether because people don't fall in love at first sight anymore. They swipe right on their phone, and so even the name might be obsolete. So we try to shift the museum from what they do and how they do it to something more inclusive, more diverse, and more rooted in what's actually going on in the world and the societal conversation everyone's having around love. And we basically landed on being a creative space for everyone, to explore all forms of love, not just romantic, working with local communities to make sure all our communities actually feel loved or loved, and finally, really looking at love as a basic human right. And that formed the basis of the fight for the institution in their communities. We landed on that purpose, which is that they are a creative space for everyone to fully experience and explore love in all its forms. Why that really matters in society is that love is a basic human right, also the museum believes, because we need it to thrive as individuals, as communities and societies. And so we won't give up until everyone around us feel loved or loved. Now that might sound a little bit cheesy, and so let's look at the program that we put together to actually put those words into action. We partnered with the refugee charity Choose Love, which effectively underpinned the whole season this year. We also partnered with the dating app Bumble for the late nights program of the museum, so young people can fall in love at first sight again. We also worked with the Harvard Medical Review to be able to commission research into our communities around us and the barriers that all people face to feel loved and against loneliness that would inform programs later down the line for the museum to work with its communities. And we focused the school's program on the concept of consent to equip children and young people to have the confidence to make empowering decisions in their lives through that process. A few months down the line, and after sort of testing and trialing some of these programs, we basically got results that showed we drove impact, reputation, and leadership. The school's programs report showed that 100% of the children and young people understood the concept of consent. Not all of them used it for making decisions, but we still reached 80%. The Financial Times took an interview with the director on the occasion of Valentine's Day to ask why love should be considered a basic human right, which is the main campaign of the museum. And Le Monde reported on the work you've done with senior citizens to make sure they feel less excluded in Paris. And they also did an experiential campaign with billboards across the city to ask people who taught them to love, pegged to the exhibition they organized to drive footfall to it. That's actually a project I've done in real life with Avantart and For Freedoms, a collective in the US. Now, all those results are mock results because I couldn't show you a case study, but they are absolutely in line with the results I get working with clients. So I can hand on heart say that that's the type of work that I've been doing and that you'd get there. I know it's quite a lot to take in within 15 minutes because it's a process that we take many months in the work I do and many years to implement to actually drive those results as well. It might take 2 years before we get to that interview with the Financial Times. So there's one thing that I'd like you to take away today. And that one idea is it all starts from that one commitment or idea which basically sets the direction of travel for the institution and gives you all the focus to deliver your cultural, financial, and social value. And that's purpose. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fanny. I think we all can't wait until we can visit this Museum of Love at the first sight, and I really wish some collector or state or city somewhere in the world to create it very fast. Very quickly, sorry. So
I need a little headset because I can't find it.
Yes,
I'm
you
sorry.
need to. Sorry. Just a second.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so you've been talking about the process, and this was very interesting, but maybe I have one question for you. It seems crucial to me that stakeholders, internal stakeholders like your board or your staff, really buy in your project. How do you manage to have them on board from the very start of this raison d'être project, and how do you manage to keep them on board on the long term?
So there's a quick answer and a longer answer to this. The quick answer is a lot of the time those projects get commissioned by the board or the leadership team, so they're involved straight away because they actually want it. But in terms of the project itself, the internal stakeholders play different roles, and we need them all. The first one is they are part of the research participants through the interviews we do, and also giving us all the information and the downloads basically to be able to find those insights. So they have a chance to get their voice heard through like a really thorough process. So a lot of the time that's how you get that enthused for the first time about the project. They are effectively the decision makers. You know, I, with my team, will draft a new purpose and a new way of action for the institution, but deep down it needs to be approved and it needs to feel right to the organization, which means we might go through different iterations of it and sort of test it as well with potentially some focus groups or some audiences that they have. So they're very much involved in that process of that iterative process as well. And then finally, they become an audience as well, because we need to launch the new version of who the institution is. A lot of the time it's not masses away from what the institution is, but it still needs a shift for everyone internally and also the board, who are ambassadors, to go out in the world and actually talk about the new institution or the new wording of the institution. And that's when they become an audience, because you also need to make sure everyone is on board with what we signed up to. And otherwise, you absolutely can't deliver the second part, which is all departments actually implementing the strategic implications of it, which is reviewing all their processes and their policies and their actions to really drive change. And otherwise, it's going to remain really surface level. Even if you have board buy-in, you also need, you know, in a business, it would be business unit. It's probably a department in an institution where everyone has to workshop how the hell are we going to get there? And that's that's the different aspects of like getting them involved, I suppose.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very clear. Do we have questions from the audience, maybe? Yes. Do you have a question in English or French? English or French?
Okay, yes, I'm hearing myself too now. Thank you so much for your presentation. I felt it was a little bit in contrast to one of the presentations you had this morning from the London Museum. But I think an interesting dynamic is also, and I work as a consultant myself, so I know your predicament sometimes, is this confidentiality. Because I know, of course, that all museums are trying to sort of invent this wheel. But on the other hand, the purpose is, you know, aimed at the societal, at diversion, at sharing. How does that work in the commissions?
I guess when I talked about confidentiality, I meant it's for the institution to go out in the world and express the work that we've done together. But as a consultant, I don't. The process itself is confidential in the sense of like I can't really mention who I've spoken to and the sort of types of documents I've looked into, because that process is very much what's within the institution. I could have shown you the sort of external landscape, so different conversation mapping that are relevant to one piece of work I've done. Like I've worked with the Wellcome Collection, for example, on colonialism and sort of different quite current topics. But it's more, once it's done, it's going to be out in the world. It's just not my place to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have other questions maybe? So Fanny, I just have one last question maybe. Actually, isn't this just communication, like mission washing, or not?
I mean, it could be. I think it's a really good question, in the sense that it's the most important risk. If it feels disconnected from the institution, if it's not very specific, if you can only show the words but not the actions, basically that's what it is. And I think it's important to mention that the other part that you haven't seen today is once you have that proposition about why you do things in the world, it's really important to map out your theory of change, basically, like a lot of charities would do, like what does the journey of transformation look like, and what will be the proof points along the way and the KPIs or the metrics or whatever you call them in your institution. And so unless you do this, the main risk is just communications, like for any company or any government or any institution, right? If policies don't follow, then it comes.
Okay, all clear. So thank you very much, Fanny.
Thank you very much.
It was very inspiring and helpful, I think.